Welcome to the Love Lessons podcast, a space for you to invest in your most important relationships 20 minutes at a time. Today I sit down with author and broadcaster Lauren Windle to discuss all things tackling addiction and navigating singleness. Here's today's episode. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I love this. I feel like I'm hosting a session on Alpha, sitting on the HTB stage.
It's great to have you here.
Yeah, a big moment for me.
Now, Lauren, last time you were here, properly, you were 17 years old.
Yes. So I talked quite a bit about my turbulent relationship with church. And when I was younger, say about 13, 14, I told my mum I didn't want to go anymore. And on and off through the years, she tried to sort of shoehorn me back in. And I just didn't get on with the church that she went to, which was in my area. But she had caught wind of the church the young people love. So she brought me as a 17-year-old. I can literally see myself sitting in the balcony, watching down. I can't remember who was speaking. I remember they were talking about fear, and they said that do not be afraid is the most frequently said command in the Bible. And I remember that they sung that song, Jesus, do, ba, 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 ba. I'm not in the worship team,
You should
which is
be.
a crying shame,
That's very good.
quite frankly.
Well, if anyone's watching who can kind of get you into that kind of thing.
Take that as an audition.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember it really well. I didn't end up going to church regularly after that, and I didn't come back. But I do remember enjoying it. And when you don't go to church at all or very often, and then you're sort of in a bit of turmoil in your life, those sort of touch point moments you do remember really clearly. Actually, I think that as regular churchgoers, we forget that we can have a conversation with someone who says oh, it's my first time here, and completely forget about it a few weeks later. But that story could remain in that person's testimony for the whole of their life.
Fast forward from 17
Yes.
here at HTB to 22.
22, yeah.
I know there's a quote that's spoken a lot to you over the years by Johann Hari. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but human connection.
Yes.
Just tell me why that mattered to you and what happened to you at age 22.
So at age 22, I started taking cocaine. And I had been drinking before that. And actually, when I came to HTB, I would have been drinking reasonably alcoholically, but within financial limits, because as a 17-year-old, I couldn't really afford to just drink and drink and drink. That kicked in when my student loan came. I had been spiraling and going down an addictive path that was really difficult, and when cocaine came along, it completely catalyzed that. So something that was always going to get quite bad got very bad very quickly. And I found myself in a position where I was addicted, which was incredibly difficult. Some people have these very traumatic stories where you can sort of see why they needed to cling on to something. And I was raised in a loving home and things like that. So it's not that I didn't have connection, but I certainly disconnected from the people who really cared about me in favor of those who didn't, and from a God who really cared about me in favor of things that gave me short-term, temporary pleasure and fun and whatever I was looking for here on earth. So coming into sobriety and then very quickly going back into church, what I found there was community, both in people who had the mutual experience of going through addiction, and then also people who didn't necessarily have that experience in the church that I went to, but who had something to show me about love and friendship and community. So that's why I think that quote is so important, because you can be sober and still be very much struggling with the same things that drove you to addiction. And actually, that's not freedom. So I love it when I see people not only step away from whatever their addictive behavior of choice was, but they replace it with something so positive as connection with those around them, connection with God, connection in community. And I think that's how we really change people's lives.
And how did that connection with God happen? So you went from being a 17-year-old where you were drinking a lot of alcohol. You didn't come back.
Didn't come back, no.
So then when you were 25,
yes.
What was it that shifted for you?
Yeah, It was going to recovery meetings, and it was my third day going to these meetings, meeting other people who were struggling with addiction or in recovery and hearing how they had done it. And they talked about this higher power. And I was open to meeting a higher power, I guess. And the one I remembered was the higher power of my childhood when my mum took me to church. I thought, well, I'll go to a church and see. And I walked in and they were just so phenomenally kind and gentle with me and gave me the space. And actually, that relationship with God, yeah, I think even as a child going to church, I liked the God thing. I didn't get the Jesus thing and I didn't Holy Spirit thing. Whoa, you know, what's going on with that? But God, I could get on board with a slightly judgmental, slightly vengeful, bit scary, but ultimately probably has my best interests at heart. That was as far as I understood of God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. So it was the people around me that kept me in church, that showed me and talked to me about the real character of God and the real character of Jesus, and then eventually also the real character of the Holy Spirit. And it was them pointing me to those things that kept me there. And I was slowly stepping forwards in faith. And then I turned around one day and realized, oh no, I really believe this. This is valuable to me. I think this Jesus guy is probably as good as they say. I think I'm as loved as they say. I think I have a personal relationship with the Holy Spirit who lives in me and a Father who loves me. And actually that made all the difference. But it wasn't lightning bolt like some people have. It was people slowly, consistently redirecting me back to the cross.
And you've got quite a significant anniversary coming up.
Yeah.
Next year. Tell us what are you marking next year?
Well, so I'm 9.5 years clean and sober as things stand. And coming up very soon will be, actually no, I'm more than that. But anyway, coming up very soon is my 10 years sobriety.
Amazing.
Which is amazing. They do say though, so we don't round up in sobriety because you can't count your chickens, but I intend to remain committed to my sobriety and to my faith, and I am very much looking forward to celebrating that.
Lauren, that's amazing. And you've been busy because you've written this book.
I wrote a book, yay!
Notes on Love,
Here she is.
which I've loved reading. And
I love it when married people read it. I know you only
Why is
did
that?
because I'm coming on. I think there's a special place in heaven for married people who are no longer in that place, but they want to understand that it actually is quite difficult. It's very easy to forget. I think it's like childbirth, right?
Go on, tell me.
You're like, I'm never doing this again. It's absolutely horrific. And then you get out of it and you see the joy of that child and you're like, childbirth's not that bad. What a special moment. How wonderful that creation, when really at the time you're like, why have I done this to myself? And I think that being single, for married people, they can sometimes look back at it with those same rose-tinted glasses and they can be like, oh, wasn't it so special when I didn't have to coordinate my diary with someone else and my money was my own? And I don't think I really struggled with it as much as some people seem to talk like they do. Maybe you didn't, and particularly if you got married quite young. But for people who got married in their 30s or 40s, I think they're more likely to remember that actually there's a lot of pain involved for some people, not everyone. That's
a really helpful image. So what we're doing in this interview, we're going to take off the rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah.
And we're going to go there. So, I mean, immediately, when you get given this book, you buy this book, your kind of title, Being Single and Dating in a Marriage-Obsessed Church.
Do you think the church is marriage-obsessed, Dave?
Talk to me about that, Lauren. Where did that come from?
Does the church feel like it's marriage-centred to you?
Do you know what? I recently we did a series of relationship talks here at church. And I gave kind of the first one. And there was a point at which I said, the chief relational goal, aim of your life is like Jesus, not marriage.
Yes.
And I'm so sorry if it's ever been communicated like the other way around, or that it's a goal that until you reach it, you haven't really fully started kind of life. And as I said that, I could both hear and sense an audible kind of like sigh of like, oh.
Yeah.
Do you know, and actually, as I said it, it almost felt like blasphemy. It almost felt like I said something naughty.
No one says that. No one says that.
In just addressing the fact that marriage, whilst important and beautiful, and it probably has become something that can be like quite anxiety-inducing if it's not present in your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but thank you for the question.
You
interview me some more.
Yeah, no,
you tell me, how did you get there? And
I think to have somebody who's in leadership actually stand from the front and go, you know, if you're a single person here, our aim is not to get you married. We're not trying to get you across the line, trying to get you to level up. You're not waiting your turn. Actually, whilst nobody's probably, or hopefully, no one stood from the front and said, right, single people, we need to get you guys all married. It's just the impression you get. And we base the church often around the school calendar, which is not relevant to a single person. Single people probably still want to come to church in August. It doesn't have to be a skeleton
Or we're
service.
breaking for half term.
Yeah, breaking for half term for your home groups and things like that. Also, if you are a single person who is no longer, say, student age, there's probably not a ministry at your church for you, because there may well be, if you're at a church which is really equipped with different ministries, right, like quite a big church, you've definitely got kids, you've definitely got youth, you may well have students, and then you kind of get into this grey area, and then when you're ready to get married, there's probably a pre-marriage course, marriage course or something like that. There may be some parenting things, family-related ministries and stuff like that. So you can find yourself as a 30-year-old who falls between two stools, and your only real option is to serve on those ministries rather than to feel fed by them. And that can feel like a shame. And the majority of people who run churches are married men. And what we tend to hear from them in their analogies and depictions and their stories is, my child did this, my wife said that, you know, and how relatable is that? And that really reminds me of the Holy Spirit. And you're like, actually, it doesn't remind me of anything, because that's not a relatable scenario for me, you know. And it can feel like, when you look at the stage, when you look at the governing body of your church, it tends to be the married people. This was a survey in America, which does have different attitudes, different culturally, but still, that said 50% of the churches asked would not let an unmarried person run one of their midweek groups. Now, that would mean that Jesus is not qualified, and that is just outrageous.
We did a recent census here at HDB, which showed of those at church on that particular Sunday, 52% of the church were single. How do we create like an environment where people who are single in a church flourish and thrive? Because the majority of people listening, well, they may not go to church, they may go to church and be single and think, oh my goodness, Lauren, everything you just said is exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
You may have couples in the church who are thinking, okay, what can I do to support those who are single better? What's the antidote? What would you do if you were creating the culture, the environment for singles to thrive within churches?
And it's not just church leadership. I think church leadership can set a sort of tone, but actually what really makes the difference is a sort of critical mass on the floor, adopting it and running with it and actioning things, because a church leader can't do everything, and that's not their job either. Their job is to kind of guide and instruct and nudge in the right direction and point you back towards God. I think it'd be great to see those things change up a little bit. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't reference your wife in your sermons or your kids, and if it's particularly relevant or a sort of endearing or eye-catching story, then of course, but just be mindful of the fact that not everyone relates to that in the way that you do. But actually, you know, it's so rare to hear someone stand at the front of the church and say, look, I know that for some of you, the fact that you've been praying for a husband or wife since you were 18, 20 years old, and years down the line, that person hasn't come along, is the single greatest disappointment of your life. I know that you can experience good things and enjoy them, but you feel that there's a cloud over those things because you're not sharing them with someone else in the way that you'd like to and in the way that you've seen your friends go off and do. And I know that you can feel left behind and forgotten and disappointed and lonely and like you've got no hope. And I'm not telling you I'm going to fix that. And I'm not telling you, right, so here's bachelor number 3. So much of life, so much of faith is not, here's a fix for your problem. It's, I see you, I hear you, you're not alone while you feel this way. And that is how people often don't feel. And I think from the floor, right, and in the book, I talk about this, and I think it's so important. It's bigger than just being single and dating. We in the church, we have muddled hospitality and entertaining. You think like, oh, we'll have some people over after the service on Sunday. Oh, quick, clean the bathroom before we go out. We'll put the Come Dine With Me soundtrack on when they come in. I'll take their coats, 2 courses, 3 courses. That's entertainment, and it's phenomenal, and we love that. We love a dinner party, right? But hospitality is going, yeah, we're heading back. No, we've had something in the slow cooker. Yeah, sure, there's enough. We'll just microwave some mash if there isn't. You put your own dish in the dishwasher, and that's it. There's no airs and graces. But that person feels like, not like they're your guest, but like they're your family. And there's the difference. I think for a single person, to have a family, they can rock up at the house, they're welcome, they can be like, oh, I'll read to the kids, I'll bath the kids. And this is not, obviously this isn't everyone. You need your inner circle, and the family needs to be comfortable with you, and you need to be comfortable with them. But we need to be investing in those relationships to get them to that point of intimacy. Because actually at the moment, if someone walks into the church and they are single, but they don't want to be, or they're single and they have decided that that is God's best for them and they're committing to that singleness for one reason or another, they need to know that they are not compromising on connection. And actually, if I were to stand here and go, do you know what, I'm not going to get married, I think my fear would be that it would be ready meals for one in a 1-bed flat on my own 6 nights a week. And in a church family, there's absolutely no need for that. So I think that that's how we can open up our homes and we can create real church family that lasts beyond Sundays. You don't ditch at Christmas because you've got your real family coming. Actually just open home policy within reason, in a boundaried way, with a few people who you really trust is really important.
I love that. And I mean, what you touched on, there's so much gold there. And one is about awareness of how other people are, and particularly for couples to be not just so, because there's that definition of sin. Is it Martin Luther who said, like, sin is like a life turned in on itself? And it's almost like the danger is the same with couples, that couples could become like so insular and so just like this to each other that they miss what's going on. Yeah. So there's an awareness piece of who in the church, who's around me and who can I draw in to share in. Again, it's like, I mean, I'm not really a theologian, but it's like the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were probably, you could say they were quite happy just as they were. And yet they kind of, in some way, drew us into the frame. They made space for another. And I wonder if that's a challenge for couples in the church, making space for others within our lives, our homes. Yeah. But you've also touched, I think, on what can be the pain of singleness. Yes. Which, again, I've often found it a tricky conversation in that I don't want to assume that singleness is a painful thing. Yeah. Because in doing that, I'm suggesting that the chief end of every human being is to get married. But I guess if you've got a relationship with somebody, then if there is pain there, then they're going to talk to you about it because you've got a relationship. Does that make sense? I think we go wrong by assuming the right to comment on other people's relationships, right? So I'll tell you when I did this, right? I get this wrong. I was at a wedding, turned to the guy standing next to me, who'd been with his partner, his girlfriend for a couple of years. And I said, oh, this is gonna be you next.
And he was like, okay, Lauren, thanks. They broke up the next day. And I had no idea that they had actually been to see a counsellor, that they were in these conversations, that they were very much at crisis point and having these difficult chats. The fact that I didn't know that meant that I probably shouldn't have been commenting on his relationship. There'd be 5 or 6 people in his life who are fully aware of that. They're the ones to go, what about you? Should you be proposing? And they wouldn't be asking that question at that time because they know the situation, they have the context. I don't walk up to you and go, tell me about, when was the last time you had a date night? How's your marriage? You know, because actually there will be people who you speak to about your marriage, who you go to for support, but it's wisdom that that's not me. And that's not just any old person in the church. And particularly with single people, we all do it. Oh, when's your turn? Oh, you put yourself out there. You're on dating apps. How you doing? How are you doing in here? And actually, are you invited into that? And it's okay if you run a ministry and somebody's showing up, or you're in a life group with someone. There's layers of intimacy or an accountability you're invited into, right? You don't have to be someone's best friend. But you can say hey, you're single at the moment. How do you find that? Is that a choice for you? Are you hoping for a relationship? How can I be praying for you? And that's not, A, on the assumption that they want marriage, B, on the assumption that they're finding this time pre-marriage or without marriage full stop difficult. It's just saying I'd like to be able to support. How are you? And they may be like, oh, I'm totally fine. Gosh, it'd be a nightmare to be married. And that's fine.
I think also it's almost like we just need better chat. I think because sometimes it's the small talk of an opening conversation.
You've done the weather. You found out they got there by tube.
So are you married?
Dating anyone?
Dating anyone? And then they say no. You're like, oh, it's like kind of end of conversation. It's almost like a sensitivity around, and I think what you've got at is it's a thoughtfulness. Thank you so much for joining us on the Love Lessons podcast. We're going to be continuing our conversation with Lauren Windle in the next episode. We'll see you there.